Welcome to another episode of Cadence Fishing TV, and I'm with Neil Lawrence, one of our brand ambassadors and friends, and we're fishing on the River Dove near Tutbury. And the Dove for me is a bit of a mystical river really. It's a river that I've only fished a few times, and I've seen a lot of amazing catches over the years, you know, in the press and also now on Facebook. And Neil, you've been doing really well on the river, haven't you?
I have, yes. We've fished 5 matches so far, and I've managed to sort of win 5 of my section. So I've not been in the main frame yet, but there's always time for that.
Well, just to set the scene, we're in February and it's been an amazing warm spell, hasn't it? Yesterday I think was the hottest February on record. And then this morning we've been greeted by a really hard frost. It was -2 when I left my house this morning. Yeah. And it's a very bright day, so conditions are going to be quite hard, aren't they?
Yeah, I think initially to start off with, until it warms up a bit, I think we might struggle for the first hour, but there's always hope. The grayling should show anyway.
Well, you've picked a reliable peg here that you like, and I think I'm going to go and fish up towards the bridge, and perhaps we'll sort of reconvene in about an hour or so and see how we're going. We want to just try and catch a fish to get the pressure off and get Chappie off our back. Yeah. So
it's always a good start to see if you can catch fish straight.
All right, brilliant. Let's get going, yeah?
Okay, no worries.
I've been fishing for about 20 minutes and I've not had a bite yet, but it's been good just running my float through and constantly adjusting my shotting pattern and depth to understand the sort of contours and flow on the peg. It's actually really shallow. It's probably only about 3 foot deep, 4 foot deep maximum, and I've been fishing down the middle. The further I go over, it gets shallower, and then it comes shallower towards this bank. So I've actually just decided to scale down. I've gone down to a size 19 hook and a 010 hook length. So just want to see if there is a sneaky grayling out there that we can trick. And often when I'm fishing on rivers like this, particularly when there's big fish about, I don't mind trying a bit finer like this, just to see if there are some fish out there that are, you know, avoiding the slightly heavier hook length. But I won't do it for long. I might only do it for 3 or 4 casts, and if I don't catch, then I'll go back onto the heavier line, because there's not a lot of point just sticking on the lighter line and then hooking a big fish and losing it. But I think what we'll do is we'll give this swim another 20 minutes, and then I might move up to the peg above the bridge. I had a quick look this morning, and it's a bit more, there's a bit more cover up there, and it's a bit more sheltered from the sun because it's such a bright day already. This peg's quite exposed, so maybe we'll do that and come back and try this again later. Well, I have failed so far in this swim, so like I mentioned, I think I'm now going to go and try up above the bridge. It's often the way in the winter, particularly when it's a cold, frosty morning like this. It can take a while for the fish to start feeding, and also you'll find that in the winter the fish can be shoaled up in certain areas, and you often see that on a match. There'll be 3 or 4 people catch really well and then other people really struggle. So certainly when you're pleasure fishing, it pays to have a move and try somewhere else. So let's go and give it a go. Well, I moved to this really nice looking peg here, and just second run down I've got a fish, and I think it might be a small grayling. It's either that or a trout, but just try and get it past Mont. Yeah, it's a small grayling anyway, so it's the target species. It's just a small one. They're really difficult to hold, so I'm not going to keep it out for long. Hopefully we might catch a few more, maybe even a bigger one. Let's get it back. Off she goes. Well, like on the first peg, I'm feeding very lightly to start with. I think I was only maybe the second or third cast that I actually had that fish, and this peg's a little bit deeper than the other one, and I really fancy it because of the fact at the moment it's in the shade. You can see there's lots of cover from these trees, and I think on a bright day like that, that's going to be critical. So hook bait was just a single red maggot, and I'm using a 2 number 4 stick float. So it's a nice light stick float because it's so shallow. And it was actually the float I was using on the initial peg, so if I find this is deeper, I might move up to a slightly bigger stick, but at the moment this is working well. You can see it's quite a boily, turbulent peg, and that seems to be the case on the River Dove. It's a very powerful and pacey river. It's just so exciting because I'm running this float down and I just really don't know what I'm going to hook next. There's a nice overhanging tree down there as well, so that's providing some good cover, and I actually had that grayling just above it, so I'm just going to take it really gently and keep loose feeding just 5 or 6 maggots. So I don't want to overfeed the grayling. And you never know, if we get a chub, then we might up the feed and see if we can catch a bag of chub. Well, just before I got to this peg, I was deliberating which one to go on, so I gave Neil a call. And Neil has had a grayling as well, so he's off the mark, but he's struggling a bit, so it does look like it could be one of those days. It's going to be a tough day, that's for sure, but if anybody can work it out and know the stretch, it's going to be Neil. So we'll give this a good go on this peg, and what I might do then is just go down and see him, and we'll go and see how he's fishing it and how it compares to how I am. Just had another little grayling. It really was tiny, just 2 or 3 ounces, and I'm playing a better fish now. I actually think it's another grayling, not a chub. I've still been feeding very, very lightly. I was just starting to think about upping the feed for a chub, and I've hooked this one. Just want to see what it is first, because it's definitely a grayling, I think. Let's try and net it past Monty. Oh no, it's a chub after all that. Not a massive chub, but still, that's a start. I'll just, it was fighting, it was kicking and twisting like a grayling, but I guess it's just might be just the pace of the water. It's not a monster dove chub, but perhaps nudging a pound. I'll get him back. In fact, I'm not. I'm going to keep him in a keep net, because that's one thing I've learnt with chub, is you can spook the fish if you start to return them into the shoal. Monty, leave it. Right then, let's see if there's some chub moved into the swim. As is nearly always the case with fishing, feeding is just so critical. And I mean, the dove is notorious for being tough on days like this when it's bright, the river's low. Neil mentioned it at the start that he was a bit worried about it. But I think that's when refining your tactics in terms of your rigs and hooks and hook lengths, like we just mentioned, and also feeding becomes so critical. And I'm going to start feeding again now after this little break, and I know I started off feeding very lightly because we were looking for grayling, but now I know there's chub in the swim, I want to up the feed. But I'm not just simply throwing in handfuls of bait every so often. I'm trying to feed as regularly as I can with small amounts of maggots like this. So I'm feeding by catapult, and by doing that I can be very accurate as to where I'm feeding them. I'm not actually feeding in a really tight area. I'm consciously trying to spread the bait out. And what I'm trying to achieve is, I'm convinced that the chub are there. It's really hard and I'm trying to trick them. So if I just fired one big pouch full of maggots out in the same spot every cast, ran my float down, I think you might, even on a good day, you might only catch a couple of fish. But by really varying the feed in terms of the quantity that you're firing out at once, and also where you're firing it. So a lot of the time I've been firing it just past the middle in front of me. It's a very pacey swim. So I don't want to feed too far down my peg because that's going to push the chub further away from me. And also I don't want to be feeding upstream today because there's a chance that I could catch a fish on my feed. So where the feed's landing, sometimes the chub will come shallow up. So if I fed upstream, that would be very difficult to achieve. And I think a really key thing that I taught myself years ago after watching Jan Porter fishing at Evesham was being able to feed like this whilst holding the catapult, because it means that when I'm fishing I can be holding the float, so the rod rather, I can be running the float down the swim and I can be feeding whenever I want. And what I believe what that's doing is it's creating a stream of bait that's coming down, and the chub getting very confident feeding and moving around the swim, and then I've got a chance of tricking them with my hook bait. I've actually seen it many times when I've been fishing. You can do it when you're stood on a bridge if there's a swim where you're catching chub and you can see the chub. You can have your float running through the shoal and the chub are just simply moving out the way, but they're intercepting all the other loose feed. And when you've seen that, I think that gives you an insight, a really amazing insight into what's perhaps happening in your swim. And that's what kind of spurs me on hard days like this, is I want to keep imagining where the chub might be, keep varying my feed, varying my rig, so that I can perhaps trick the odd one, even if there's not very many there. Who knows how many's out there, but by having that sort of attitude, I think will really help you catch more chub. So I'll show you what I mean about how I'm feeding and what my thinking is. So I'm casting out straight in front of me where I'm feeding most of the time. And what I like to do is, a lot of the time I'll feed right around my float for the first sort of, let's say, the first quarter of the swim. Because that's where you might just get a fish that's coming up into the feed and intercepting the maggots as they're landing and sinking through the swim. And obviously as you go further down the peg, you're relying on those maggots that you've been feeding at the top to trundle down the swim and probably settle and stop in different places. And that's what you'll often find. You'll find areas where the fish are holding up, and that, I think, is where the maggots must be holding up, or they're easy for the fish to find. Nearly all the fish I've caught today have been, I don't know, about a third down the swim, and I've had to really trick them by holding back the float and letting it go, holding it back. And by fishing over depth, it's forcing you to do that. And I think what it's doing is it's kicking the bait up amongst the loose feed, and you're fooling the fish. So sometimes like this, I might not actually cast out, I might just feed sort of 10, 15 maggots 3 or 4 times in that area, and then cast out. So I'll know that I'm running over top of those maggots that I've been feeding, and I'll even feed a few more around the float. So when I hold back, I'm kicking the bait up into that feed. And the big chub I caught was around about this area here. I just mended the line like this and held the float back and then let it go. I'd just love to know how many chub are out there. I really fancied that tree at the bottom of the swim to hold some fish, but as yet I haven't caught any chub down there. And just to emphasise again, by holding the rod and feeding with my catapult, I can be obviously controlling my float. I can strike if I get a bite, but I'm still able to maintain that constant stream of maggots through the swim. Well, I've just had a bit of a blank spell for a good half an hour, 40 minutes, and I've just got another fish. I'm guessing it's another one of those sort of puppy chub, around about a pound, but I keep hoping it's a big grayling. It is a chub. Another one similar sort of size. Just nicked him in the mouth with a single red maggot. I'd actually changed down to a size 20 hook. I still kept a decent hook length on. I just wanted to try a single maggot, and I think in these bright conditions that's probably helped, and we've managed to trick another nice chub. It actually feels really cold, so it just perhaps highlights the fact that that hard frost last night's really knocked the fishing on the head, certainly to start with anyway. Well, I've just had another sort of blank spell again for the 20 minutes. I was trying all the tricks in the book, and I've just hooked a nice fish. Now I think this is a good chub, and typically I'd just scaled down to a 0.9 hook length, so I'm right on the limit here. I'm just trying to take my time, and I've stood up because I just want to try and keep the fish up in the water so I can see some weed and rocks on the bottom. So wow, nice one. I'm really pleased with that. That was really nip and tuck on that finer gear. It's perhaps worth mentioning my rod. I'm using the 15-foot number 1, and I find it just a fantastic rod, particularly when I'm fishing finer like this. And just by taking my time, I've managed to get that chub out. So let's have a look at him. I actually distinctly remember then, I really held the float back. I've been running the float through, and I got to about halfway down my peg, and I really held the float back, and it managed to trick that fish. So I'm going to hold him up for you. And that is a proper dove chub. That's got to be 3.5 pound, that one. And look at it shimmering in the sun. It's absolutely beautiful. Well, I'm just giving the swim a rest now, which can be good tactics, certainly when you're chub fishing. You'll find that if you stop feeding for 10-15 minutes, you normally can go back in and catch another one. So we thought it was a good time to just have a look at the rig and float that I'm using. So the float itself, I did change up in size. I started off on a 2 number 4, and this is a number 1 Dave Harrell shallow stick. But I've actually gone up to a 5 number 4 because it's actually a bit deeper this swim than what it looked like, and I needed a bit more lead and shot down the line to be able to control the float. This is a great pattern of float, this kind of dome topped, quite a short wire stem stick float. Especially when you're fishing on shallower rivers like the Dove, when you've got lots of turbulence and boils in the water, because the wire stem's quite thin, so it doesn't get caught by the flow as much as a thicker material, and it also provides some stability in the weight that's that's in it, which helps when you're mending the line, controlling the float, and also when you're casting. And finally, the thick top on the float is absolutely essential when you're long trotting like this. So you've got a pacey peg and you're running the float right down your peg, just simply so you can see it. And also helps because a lot of the time you're actually fishing a little bit over depth like I am today, and having a slightly more buoyant tip enables you to be able to run or bounce some of the line and the hook bait down the bottom. And that's exactly the form of presentation that I've found best today. So I'm fishing I must be fishing probably 2 foot over depth. In the bottom foot I've got no shot at all. I've got my hook length. I've gone back up to a 0.11mm hook length now after hooking that big chub. I will scale down again if I don't get any bites. And then I've simply got number 8 spread out in the sort of bottom, I don't know, half of the rig. But I've had to constantly change the shotting pattern just to vary it. I mean, the fishing's tough, and by doing that, that's when you can sometimes sneak out a few extra fish like we have today. So the actual hook I'm using, I think is of note. That's a Camazam B510 size 20, and I've only caught the chub scaling down to that size hook. I'm fishing a single maggot, and it's something that I've had to remind myself. You know, I grew up fishing for chub and roach on the River Avon, and where you've got a hard venue where it's hard fished, you need to scale down your hook size. And I think we've all been guilty with the fact that some of the rivers are so prolific, like the Y and the Severn, of using much bigger hooks. And I just remember, you know, when I was growing up on the circuit on the Warwickshire Avon, for me a size 20 B510 was a big hook. That was the hook I put on when I was really bagging up. So it's funny that today I'm talking about that being my smallest hook, but it's definitely worth bearing in mind on harder days like this. Same goes for the actual hook length. I've switched over to this Vest Pro line now, which I really like. It's actually amazing me really. It's very, very accurate, but it seems to be very tough and strong, and I'm finding that I'm losing a lot less fish since I've been using it. I started off on the 12.5 this morning, and I didn't catch anything on it. I think I've had some of I was scaled down to 0.112, and then finally had that big chub on 0.97. So I mean, you wouldn't think it would make any difference to the fish, would you? Just a few millimeters, but I think it does. And so many times it's proven you just scale down and you can suddenly get a fish out of nowhere. So it must be true. Mainline is my really reliable Pro Gold, which is in 017 in this case. I might scale down to 015, but on a river like this where there's potentially some big fish to be caught, you might need to up your hook length, so the 017 allows me to do that. The reel is our ever reliable CS5 4000, and I think that complements the 15-foot rod perfectly. And I mentioned it just as I'd landed that big chub that more and more now I'm using longer rods. I'm using 15-16-foot rods on the rivers, and not only do you obviously get great control when you're presenting your float and casting your float, but when you are hooking bigger fish, that extra length just seems to give you so much more control. And I've just got total confidence in it now. This season's amazed me. I've caught some really big barbel on finer hook lengths and big chub. And for me, I think I'd find it difficult to go back to using a shorter rod on all but the very smallest of rivers. Well, it is proving to be very tricky today. A good tip for you when you're stick float fishing on a river or even bollow fishing, certainly on a shallow peg, is when you got your float to the bottom of the peg, rather than reel it back in straight up the peg like this with the rod low, what I like to do is like to bring my rod up and very quickly wind the float and the rig and everything to the surface and just bounce it back down the inside of the river back to me. And there's two really good reasons for doing that. One is, I think certainly on a clear river like this, you don't want to be reeling your float and rig back through your swim where you're feeding all the time. And secondly, I don't tend to get any line twist, because I know some people really suffer for line twist when you're reeling float and the hook, it can twist up in the water, and by bringing it to the surface and bouncing it back, you don't get any line twist at all. Even when you're fishing with fine line like this, I've gone back down to 0.097 now, and it's just something to bear in mind next time you're out river fishing.
Well, James, it's been an hard day today, hasn't it?
It's been a real struggle, Neil, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that first peg I fished, that lovely peg below the bridge, I never had a bite. So I decided to move up here. I had a look up here, and it's a nice shady swim, this one. And basically I've managed to catch, I've had a couple of chub, about 14 ounce to a pound. And one nice big chub, about 3 or 4 pound. And a few small grayling.
Yeah.
But how about you? How have you got on?
Oh, dreadful, to be fair. I had a chub and a grayling down on my banker peg, and I've struggled again further up. It's been really tough. But again, that sunshine, early doors, and the frost as well we had.
Yeah.
And probably the temperature last night as well. And during the day as well. So.
Yeah.
It's been hard going.
I mean, it's the most beautiful stretch of river, and I said at the beginning, I haven't really fished the Dove much, and I've heard so many good stories about it, and you can see why. It's just a river full of features, and it's clearly an amazing venue. But I think, we've just caught it on a bad day. That frost has really done us a bit of an issue, and then I think more importantly, how low it is.
Yeah.
And how clear it is with this sunshine. I think the fish are here, but they just don't want to feed.
I had a look early on my phone. It was 0.5 down at Marston, so you're going to struggle in them conditions anyway, to be fair. So, I mean, the river's desperately in need of some water, really. So, but again, that's fishing, and on a different day, you could have bagged up on the chub. I mean, we've had some fantastic bags of chub, and it shows in some of the match results as well.
Yeah. Well, I've seen on Facebook you've had some huge grayling, huge chub, huge barbel.
Yeah.
And I think we should really mention the club as well, Burton Mutual. First of all, thanks for inviting me today.
No problem.
Amazing to come and fish it, and the club's got amazing stretches on river, canal, and lake.
Yeah. To be fair, the members that we've got really. And to ratio to the water, we could do with a lot more members, really. Yeah. To be fair.
Well, I think when you look at it, it's tremendous value, and I'd definitely love to come back. So maybe I'll definitely join next season.
Yeah.
So I think what we'll do, perhaps give it another hour, Neil. Okay. Maybe it's a light drop, so we never know. We might trick a few fish, and failing that, maybe we'll go for a beer.
That's it. That's the one.
Cheers. Good luck.
Okay.
Well, we just had that chat with Neil, and it was literally first cast back in, and I've hooked a chub. So I think I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about resting the swim. It often works when you're catching chub. So that's another nice chub, and I'm absolutely pleased with that. I think I mentioned it, I'd scaled back down to the 097 and that tricked that one. So it was a bit of a tussle again, perhaps not quite as big as that other good one I had. It's definitely £3, and I think with our last fish we're going to call it a day. So hopefully Neil might be able to go back and catch a few fish as well, but another cracking chub, perhaps £2.5, maybe not quite £3, but just sort of proves what I was saying about the fact that they are here. And as we discussed with Neil, I think the fact that the river's so low and clear and we've got such bright conditions, it's making them very, very difficult to catch. Oh well. Well, I just had that one chub at the end there, Neil, and ended up with 4. How about you?
Yeah, I had one chub and a grayling from down the bottom, and not a bite in my banker pad. But you know.
Listen, it's just been one of those days. Conditions were against us, but yeah, that's fishing, isn't it?
That is, it is, yes.
Well, thanks again, Neil.
No problem.
Appreciate it, and we better get back again soon.
Okay.
Well, it was a tough day in the end, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.